Hello and welcome to episode 65 of the Crate and Crowbar PC Gaming Podcast. It is the 22nd of October 2014. My name is Chris Thurston and joining me are Graham Smith.
Hello.
And Tom Francis.
Hello.
News this week, as former EA CEO John Riccicello is announced as the new CEO of Unity, an indie game creation platform accessible to everybody.
So I just read this on the way over here, and there were rumours recently of Unity being sold, as they were with Mojang, which turned out to be true. They were like, oh, is it that, like, someone had heard they were up for sale, and so would Microsoft buy them, or would Adobe buy them, or like another tools company? And it was terrifying because Unity is it's really good. I've used it for two very small games, but I'm not using it for my current project. I probably will use it in future. And it's good right now, but I also think it's just going to keep getting better if it's allowed to run its course. If the person in charge of what that company does has as their main objective making tools better for game developers, like that has to be your sole concern. And I think, are they a private company?
I think so. Yeah.
So you can actually do that. Like, there's this old cliche about, companies have to make money. That's their, they always have to care about money above everything else, because that's just how companies work. It's not. That's how public companies work, but private companies can care about whatever they like. They could be entirely charitable and exist that way. My company exists entirely to make me happy. There's no other objectives. If it ever makes money, it's only because I want some money. I could decide equally for it to not make any money. In fact, I do turn down lots of opportunities that could make money, because I care about something else instead. And so, when it was, I assume the previous CEO was one of the founders of Unity, or like...
It seems so.
At any rate, at some point it must have been run by the founders, if only at the moment of founding. And at that point, the person in charge of the company, they might be in it to make money, but probably not. There are probably better ways to make money. And so you can kind of rest assured that the person actually in charge is in it to actually make things better. And they've gone really, really far along that route. I'm not saying it's all over now that they have a CEO who used to be the CEO of EA, but it does mean almost the same thing as being bought out, which is that now the person in charge is going to be primarily after money. That's what he's good at, and that's a little bit worrying.
I remember a few years back going to visit PopCap. PopCap was founded by three people who just kind of wanted a fun life, as far as I could tell, and they were just kind of interested in making games, and messed around with a couple of things that didn't really go anywhere, and then made Bejeweled. And it was like the third game, and they tried to sell it to different companies, and no one would buy it. But I think it was Microsoft for the MSN Games portal came and said, oh, we'll license it from you for $10,000 a month. And suddenly they had, there were only three young guys, $10,000 a month. They were like, this is alright. If we do this for a couple of other games, we're making $30,000 a month. This is great. Which is what they did. Two of them then moved to Argentina, because they've got really good steak and wine in Argentina. And spent a couple of years living there. And the third one, who didn't really know anything about technology, he would come up with a game idea or a thing for them to make, and the other two would go, that's going to be really hard to program and make. That's going to take us a good long little while. And then they would sit and play Counter-Strike. And so when I went to visit them, they were, after a couple of years in Argentina, the founders came back to San Francisco and decided that they were going to buckle down, focus on the company, grow it, and see what they could do. So when I got there, they were in this high-rise tower block with 3 floors. They were just opening the 3rd floor. And they'd hired a CEO who had worked at a bunch of other tech companies. And all they would talk about when I was there was how, we're not growing the company in order to sell it. We've no interest in selling it. And our CEO, he didn't really understand that. He was coming in from the tech industry, and he thought, we'd grow it, we'd sell it, and we'd make a bunch of money, and that was the goal. I'd interviewed the CEO, and he said, it took me a long time to understand these guys, but they're really interested in being creative, and that's all. And then 18 months later, they sold to EA for $2 billion, I think. I was like, always skeptical. For exactly the reasons you described, Tom. Because even when the CEO and the creative people say that they're not doing things for business reasons, it often just, even if the CEO works for you and you're telling them that you don't want to sell, if you're hiring a CEO, it's because he's going to handle the business side of things. And if he's good at his job, he's going to make your company more appealing to people who might like to buy it. And when that happens, someone comes along and says, would you like 1.5 billion? Suddenly maybe now you want to sell.
Yeah, it is kind of like, oh yeah, we did bring in the Hypnotoad. We're really confident that he is basically just an ordinary toad.
Just an honorary role, really. He won't be hypnoing anything.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, as far as our perception goes, 100% regular toad. And the thing is, like, I mean, it's with EA particularly, or any big publisher, but particularly EA, it's kind of impossible to know which decision you might agree or disagree with about their overall strategy originated anywhere. But I will always, I think, associate Riccitiello with, like, EA's really bad late noughties period, which they are arguably pulling out of, I think. I think actually lately the company's gotten better at the things that everyone hates EA for. Like, things like, you know, proprietary currencies have sort of drifted away and vanished, and even, like, extensive pre-order DLC has been dialed back, and, like, you haven't seen it for a while, like, in the big EA games, and that's a step in the right direction. I mean, it's a company being less shit.
Wasn't Riccitiello the CEO who tanked the share price and greenlit stuff like Dead Space and Mirror's Edge, which underperformed?
But this is the thing, like, because
I
don't know, and I genuinely don't know, and that's the thing. But the question of who greenlights what in EA is a ongoing subject of some debate.
Yeah, this is certainly true.
Because, and, you know, so whichever one aside you put it, but that was also the era of the BioWare acquisition in Dragon Age 2 and the problems there and all these other kinds of sort of stories emerging. It was I think it was the era of EA Spouse as well.
Yeah.
So, it depends which evidence you're going to cherry pick, basically. But yeah, so I think probably the only thing you can take away is he's certainly a businessman.
Yeah. And you do
use your own biases.
It definitely makes sense to have a business person, and it's often a waste when it's, you know, the chief creative person at the company, because now all the time's going to be spent doing business stuff. But I feel very reassured when a company has a really bad business person. It just isn't that good at making money out of things, because that's kind of what ruins them sometimes.
It's the notion that someone else can buy it. I think that's always sort of slightly weird. I know this is one of the principles of any free market, but at the same time, the notion that someone's even allowed to say, like, I'll give you a stupid amount of money for that, but does put people in an awkward position. Like, no matter how much you value your creative freedom or the thing you've built, like, $2 billion is still $2 billion.
$2 billion is a lot of creative freedom.
It is, as well. And a lot of steak and wine.
I would sell my company, and then just start a new identical one and continue to, you know, make the same things, I guess.
More suspicious developments.
Yeah, increasingly suspicious developments.
I think, like, EA bought BioWare, and Greg Zishuk now seems to just make craft beer, and Ray Mazika just seems to travel the world and take fabulous photos.
Yeah, takes really good photos.
Yeah, got a Flickr account.
He is also, I said basically that on Twitter and he corrected me, so he's also an angel investor and has some other, I can't remember what the other thing was, but he has another ongoing engagement. He certainly gets to a lot of places and takes some amazing photos of them.
He's doing stuff to do with health in third world countries, I think. Because, of course, they were both originally doctors.
Yeah.
They were both trained medical doctors. I guess he's going back to his roots.
I wonder how many lives were lost in their BioWare that would have otherwise been saved.
Now he's making up for it.
Well, I suppose they're both stinking rich, so that they're probably saving more lives with money now than they would have been.
Not simply by having money.
Spending the equivalent. No, not by keeping it themselves.
With craft beer.
I imagine they're probably, if Ray at least, if he's actually devoting some of his life to helping people in third world countries, he's probably also giving some money to them, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Greg should break off, pack in the brewing thing and start a new company called Beerware.
Very good.
And that's not a very good joke. Tom.
Yes.
What have you been playing?
I've been playing a little bit of lots of things. Okay. So I went back to Kentucky Route Zero. Have you guys played that?
No.
No. I've watched it be played a little bit.
It's beautiful, and I played it in the IGF, I think, back when it was something that I thought might be Act 1, but actually turns out not to be. It's only like scene 1 and 2 of Act 1. So like, I think maybe half of it. And it was amazingly beautiful and perfectly stylish. It's a point-and-click adventure game. And sort of incredibly IGF. Like, just arty and sort of poignant and meaningful in minimalist ways. But very short. And then when it came out, it's episodic, and actually I've asked people this many times and they've answered me correctly and truthfully, and I've forgotten every time. Can't remember whether it's finished yet or not.
No.
It's not. Okay.
No. I think
3 episodes,
4,
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many they're planning. But I like a lot of episodic things or things that have multiple releases, like early access and final release stuff. I just lose track of it. Like, no matter how excited I am, I'll eventually forget whether it's out or not. Like Invisible Ink, is that out? I think not.
No, it's in early access, but it's not out.
So anything that has more than one release date has no chance of me ever remembering whether it's out. And so Kentucky Route Zero is, I think, even though I really, really loved the bit I played, I just hadn't got back to it for ages and ages because I didn't know, I think it would wait till it's done, but then I didn't find out whether it was done or not. And I thought, shit, there's at least 3 episodes of this thing, I should just play it. And also I think it went under the radar because they're not very good at promotion. I think, like, when they release a new episode, they tweet about it, and I think that's it. You never see anything else in terms of, like,
they missed, I think, all their deadlines. I think they were supposed to originally come out,
right.
3 months apart,
because
6 months apart.
Buy it all at once, maybe?
It was Kickstarted, wasn't it, originally?
Oh, was it?
I think so. I think it was crowdfunded to begin with. But every episode has been delayed by 6 to 9 months past what it was supposed to take.
Right. I think I remember it being like an initial offering of like X dollars, and it was a lot for one episode. And yeah, I remember thinking that might be a problem. Anyway, I played almost all of one episode now. And so it's like I say, point and click that's all very like stark colours. There's always a huge amount of black silhouette in every frame, and then the rest of the frame is beautifully lit. Starts at a gas station at sunset, and there's like the hum of fluorescent lights and an old man sitting by a petrol pump, and you have sort of sparse loaded conversations with him in which you're this truck driver who is delivering antiques, and you're trying to find this particular address, and it has loads of little weird, subtle, I'm not sure if they're even jokes or sort of references or clues or something, but you're trying to deliver to 5 Dogwood Drive, and the point of, in the course of explaining to you where that is, the gas station attendant says something along the lines of, you have a dog with you, by the way. And he says something along the lines of, yeah, you're going to it the wrong way. You and your dog would have driven somewhere else. And then you realise he just said 5 Dogwood Drive in that order. I don't know what that means or why he said it. And then, like, people who you talk to in one scene, you'll go away and come back and they're just totally vanished. Completely vanished. And you have, like, the option to kind of reference that at some point, but no one will explain why it happened. And you have to enter a password to a computer at one point that is, all the guy will tell you about it is it's a poem that kind of sums it all up. And then you have to, in 3 stages, use dialogue trees to type your own poem into the computer to work as a password. And I think it just accepts no matter what you say, or I've got it right twice by sheer genius. But it's interesting because the guy who tells you that is blind, and some of the options make reference to visual stimuli, and so I intentionally avoided those, thinking that he wouldn't consider that a poem that summed it all up, because he probably wouldn't be able to relate to that as well. And, like I said, accepted that, or maybe just accept anything. And then it does other weird stuff where, like, you meet a character, and your introduction to them is kind of the scene you would walk in on, and eventually do walk in on, of her on the phone talking to someone that you can't hear what they're saying, except you control that conversation. So before your character's even entered, or you have any context for why you're looking at this woman at all, you have to have a whole conversation on the phone with someone, and it still says inaudible for her, the things she's responding to, but then your dialogue options are the things that your character might say if she did hear what that person said, but you don't know what it was. So you have to guess. And then it keeps messing around with stuff like that. Like, at one point, I'd just been through some mines with this lady, and it was both of us, and I'd been controlling my main character for most of the time, the truck driver. And then when we went into the mines, the objective was just like, let's try and find an exit out so we can get through. And there was all kinds of interesting stuff down there. But when I found an exit, I was like, oh, let's go, because that's what we were here to do. And then she says, I want to look around a bit more. And then my dialogue options were both, to make the guy wait there and the girl go back in. But one of them was the guy saying, I'll wait here for you. And the other one was the girl saying, you should wait here, I'm going to go back in. And so I did it based on like which one sounded more polite. And I went for, I thought it more polite if the guy just offers to wait there rather than her kind of saying, well, I'm going to leave you here. So I said that, but what that meant was I'm actually going to wait here. I'm controlling the guy now. The girl goes off and does doing stuff, and I just sit here in a minecart, and I'm not allowed to leave. And he just has to sit there and think about stuff for like 10 minutes. And you can there's just various things on the minecart that you can kind of click on that you hadn't noticed before. And so you basically explore the minecart, which is this just one tiny vehicle, and ruminate on various things that are lying around it until she gets back. So it's weird and kind of cool, but it might be too slow for me. I find myself checking Twitter while I'm playing it on my phone, and it might just be because this might be a change in the way I play, because I remember Longest Journey was also too slow for me, mostly because of the excessive talking in that game, where they just you talk to somebody and they just go on and on and on, and then there's 9 other dialogue options and you pretty much need to ask them all. So I would just go through all those and then just sit back with a drink and just kind of relax and treat it less like a gaming experience and more almost like watching a movie. And with this, I haven't felt that way. I can't relax. I feel, because mostly it's all driven by your interaction, I guess, because it's not listening to long speeches. If there's a conversation, you have to be pressing next all the time. And if you're exploring a mine, for example, on a very slow minecart, you have to be clicking constantly to tell it where to go. And it just takes a long time to get there. And then if you pass something interesting, you have to manually stop and then click on it. So it never lets you kind of sit back and relax. So you have to be actively engaging with it all the time, but also nothing happens for long stretches. And it's just very sparse. When something does happen, it will just be weird and surreal and very succinct and suggest that you're going slightly mad.
That's I think that's why I bounced off it. With Longest Journey, I bounced off that as well. But I lasted longer. And it was because The Longest Journey gives you something to latch onto in terms of who you are and what this place is and what your role within it is. Whereas those opening scenes in Kentucky Route Zero is just, I don't know who I am, who's this guy, where am I going, why can I go into the basement of this place, what? I feel like I need something to grip onto that I can go, oh, okay, and then sit back and relax maybe and lose myself in it more. Right.
I do feel like I've got to that point. I know who my guy is, I know what his job is, I know what brought him here, and at times for the most part, he's the straight man, and then the people talking to are all fucking nuts in different ways. But then when you get dialogue choices, often one of them is to kind of go along with their nuttiness and just agree with whatever crazy thing they just said, or say something even crazier back. And I've been sort of role-playing as the realist, and I'll always just go for the most straightforward realistic option, which kind of is making me a bit more engaged with it, because I'm now somewhat invested in this character, because I've in some way defined him. So I like that. I will play more of it, I think, but I need to find a way to I'd like to play it with a controller. I don't think you can, because it's very mouse-driven. But that's kind of what the experience I want, is to kind of, sit back a bit and not be so... I guess basically I just use a computer all day. I don't really want to be sitting at it and using it in exactly the same way unless I have to, unless it actually is a game that requires WASD and full mouse control. It does, when you click to move, it places a stake in the ground and then throws a horseshoe at it, which lands on it to indicate where you've said you're going to walk. And it's just like a Yui thing, completely. It's not something that's actually happening in the world, but it's just one of the weirdest stylistic flourishes I've seen.
That's fun. What else have you been playing? You've been playing lots of little things.
Yes. So I also played the demo of Return of the Obra Dinn.
Oh, cool.
Came out today.
Is the next game from Papers, Please creator Lucas Pope. And it's about I think, real ship that vanished. And I think the fantasy part is that this is about it returning with no crew at all and no explanation as to what happened on it. Just drifts into dock. And the most apparent unique thing about the game is that it's rendered in 2 colours. It's first person walk 'em up. And so all of the shades of grey are done with dithering, so it looks like I don't know what generation of Apple Mac it was, but back when the Apple Mac only had
the
2 colours.
Yeah, I think it was an Apple II of some kind.
Yeah. Those kinds of games. And That style is really impressive. But so it's unfair to judge it at this point because it's very, very brief. Well, actually, no, sorry, I don't know how long it is. But he warns that almost all of the content is not there, and what is there is very unfinished. But the concept is somewhat apparent, and it seems to me to be incredibly similar to cryostasis. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the one where you could relive the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, which was also a guy on a boat where everyone's died, and your special ability is to go up to corpses and use them, and that takes you back to when they were alive, and you find out how they died. And in cryostasis, you could... I can't remember, did you play as them? I think you played as them, yeah. And then you could take different actions in their past to avoid their death, and then you would cut back to the present, and the circumstances of their death would be different. They still died, usually, but, like, now that corpse would be out of your way, or, like, the massive anvil that crushed him wouldn't be there anymore. Or he had a chance to fix something before he died, and so that's fixed in the future.
But he feels great about that.
At one point in cryostasis, you control a cow in an abattoir. It's like, oh, this is going to be a tough one. It's like the trickiest episode of Quantum Leap ever.
I was going to say that, like, are all games Quantum Leap now?
So in the Obra Dinn, I haven't figured it out yet. So you have like a death watch, and you walk up to a corpse, and you use the death watch on it, and it takes you back to when they were alive and shows you how they died. But time seems to freeze at the moment they die, and you are not that person. You're still yourself walking around it as an observer. And I don't know anything more than that. Like, I couldn't figure out what to do. I was a little bit trapped in a corridor because the people who were killing the guy and the person who was dying were blocking two of the entrances. And then I managed to get out a little bit and go up some stairs, but then someone else was blocking that. And then the time ran out and I was taken back to the present. And I accidentally used the death watch on the corpse again, and it cut me back to the start of quite a long cutscene with dialogue that I'd already watched, and there was no way to skip it, so I just quit the game. Sorry. So my guess is that you go back in time and you're just sort of observing and you just try to figure things out from the evidence that you see back then. Okay. It didn't seem to have changed anything in the present, but maybe that's just because it's not finished.
Did it have... Because Lucas Pope does really detailed development blogs, and he did this with Papers, Please, and he's doing it with this game as well. So he's been blogging his progress on it over the last 6 months, and he wrote an interesting thing about spending 2 weeks coding and animating your hand.
Yeah.
How does that work? Because it sounds like your character's handsy. Like, it sounds like your hand automatically reaches out and touches anything that can be interacted with. Like,
that would be great. I wish it did that. Because one of the issues I was having with it a little bit in terms of, like, once I was back in the past trying to figure out what I was doing, was that your only button is space to interact with stuff, other than WSD. And with door handles, fair enough, I know they're interactable, so I walk up to them and press space, my hand does reach out and very nicely grab onto them. But for everything else, I just don't know. I just have to keep hammering space on everything to find out whether it's interactable or not. And then that also brings up the death watch, and I also accidentally reused the corpse, because I was trying to figure out, like, there's an axe lying next to him, and I wanted to pick that up, or I wanted to investigate the corpse. And doing that took me back to the cutscene I'd already watched, so I got frustrated. But so it's really, obviously it's incredibly distinctive, and I love sort of the idea of just mysterious shit returning. I think the art style, although like really, really cool, maybe at this stage for me hurt the atmosphere a bit because it's so well lit. Like, you couldn't really do a sort of moody, dark game in this style, I don't think, because it would just be black. Like, it would be so difficult to distinguish anything in low light levels that the whole thing has to be pretty much 50-50 white and black. And so it felt very, like, sterile and clinical and bright. It felt like there was, floodlights basically illuminating the whole thing. And so that it looked like a sort of a brand new ship that had been modelled, artificially. And so it didn't, like, draw me into its world. Obviously it's super early, so I have no idea if that's just because it's just roughing out the area.
He also wrote a post in his devlog. He's written about every part of this game in the devlog. There's, like, it's so early in development, but he's already written, like, 40 posts. So he wrote one specifically about the lighting, and specifically about how to deal with blacks.
Oh shit. Imagine like subtly insult all the things he's tried really hard.
Well, one of the reasons that he wrote the post was that people had complained about screenshots, basically.
Right.
And he was trying to work out a way to solve it, and so he showed, like, different possible solutions to the lighting and dithering techniques he was using and stuff. So I wonder if it's still a thing that's in flux. But either way, there's this stuff we can link in the show notes, because it's super relevant.
One thing that was cool, like, because it's only two colours, it looks very retro at first, and so you're kind of expecting it to be very primitive and basic. And also, I guess, because I knew it was made by one guy, it was meant to be primitive and basic. But then when you go back in time and there are actual people, like, fighting, the character models are actually really detailed, which looks really strange in a 2-colour game to have a high poly model that you can walk around in 3D. And also one of them is being shot through the head and a spray of blood is coming out, and the kind of effects for liquid being suspended in midair are really modern and slick. And so that's really interesting to look at, because it's like, whoa, this is a very primitive rendering method for a very complex thing.
That's awesome.
It's interesting that the solution to this game your criticisms of your first impressions of this game, but going into the past to define
use the Death Watch on his devlog.
Yeah, exactly. Determine the secrets hidden in things written relatively recently.
It may just be, there's loads of stuff that I've, in theory, solved for heat signature that isn't in the current build because I haven't worked it into the main thing yet, so that could be a thing. And also, you're out on deck for most of this, so it makes sense that it's light. Maybe there's moodier stuff later on. I guess it wasn't really the light so much, it was impossible to show much detail, so it felt a bit clinical. Anyway, this is off 10 minutes playing an incredibly short demo, so probably shouldn't go into it too deeply.
Well, I think it's only meant to be 15 minutes long or something like that.
Really, the whole game?
Well, with just this demo
I
thing,
see. Right.
is apparently you could have completed it in 15 minutes. But he released it. I feel like it's fair to criticise these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Slower.
And the third thing I've been playing is Defense Grid 2. Which is a similar kind of game. Which I've only played the first 3 or 4 missions of it, and so far it's exactly the same as Defense Grid 1, so I have nothing to say about the sequelness of it. But Defense Grid in general is, I was super addicted to the previous one, completed it from start to finish, and got pretty obsessive about, I think, the last mission. Because I've been a big fan of tower defense since desktop tower defense, which was set on a desktop, like a physical desktop. And it was a completely open square of just empty space where you could place towers wherever you wanted. And there were 2 entrances and 2 exits for the creeps that could come in. And most of the game was figuring out how to lay out your towers to create a maze for them, so they have to walk around as much real estate as possible before they get to their exit. And with 2 different exits and 2 different entrances, that's tricky. And the maths of it is really interesting, particularly because it's not just the length of the route, but also if you can get them to spend loads of time around one particular turret, then you can invest all your money in upgrading that one turret, because it will always be hitting everything. And I spent ages on this, I was obsessed with this thing I called the Death Flower, which was, rather than doing a big zigzag, I would funnel them in from their entrances, and then force them all both into one outer ring. And then the outer ring would, inside it, have, I think 4, corner nodes that would each be a kind of stompy tower that would damage everything around it. And that's an area of effect thing, so it doesn't matter how many enemies are there, it will hit them all. And then spend all my money upgrading those, and design the maze so that they are, basically they would be on a corner with nothing touching them at all. So the only thing adjacent to them would be diagonal, and only one thing would be diagonal. And the creeps are forced to walk in every single one of the, let me get this right, 7 squares adjacent to it, which is the maximum amount of time you could ever spend near one of these things, because if it was 8, then you'd be able to walk freely around it, so you wouldn't need to go around it, you could just take a shortcut. So I knew it was the optimal way to get people to spend as much time as possible close to these things. I think 4 was about the right number, or it was for some reason difficult to lay it out so that you'd have more than 4 of those things. And then upgrading them cost me nearly all my money. And in theory, that should have been, I think maybe in the middle of the map I had a sniper turret, so it could be shooting everyone at all times. And they would spend ages close to these incredibly powerful towers. But my friend Ben Richardson just always completely kicked my ass. It had a way better score with a much simpler maze. So it never actually paid off. It was very satisfying to do, and it worked for a while, but it was never it would never get as far as his. And Defense Grid initially put me off because it doesn't give you that kind of freedom. It's handcrafted. It's actually story driven, and it has handcrafted levels with specific routes for the creeps, and then sometimes the creeps will come to kind of an open area, and it'll be a grid of 3 by 5 squares, and on those you can place things anywhere you like. But the rest of the time it's just certain turret points you can put a turret on there, or there'll be a bank of those, and you'll be able to place whichever turrets you like there. And then only in these certain sections will be able to actually restrict the flow of how the creeps walk around it. but it's still super, super addictive because upgrading turrets is really good, and they let you do that. And using those small spaces of freedom to figure out how you can cause the maximum inconvenience to the creeps is really fun. And then sometimes you figure out that actually, like, these restrictive places for placing the towers are a really cool place to put the tower. Like, if you have one over there and you upgrade its range enough, then not only does it get them when they come past on the right, then later on in the level when they loop back, they go close enough to it from above that it will get them again. And that kind of stuff's really fun. I think I might have maybe broken it for myself, or I don't know, I've broken my understanding of the game in that I remember reading up on Defense Grid 1, I think probably when someone had beaten my score really badly. I was like, how the hell do they do it? And I looked something up. And I can't remember what I read, but something told me, like, the basic gun turrets, if you just upgrade those, are crazy powerful. And because they're kind of the good all-rounder turret, and most waves are varied, like most, in a given game, you'll get waves of varying types. They're kind of your best bet, like, to invest a lot of points in. If you're going to spend all your money on, like, a tower that's only good against fast creeps, then you're screwed when the tough wave of slow creeps comes in. So basically upgrading those seems to be a good idea always, because you're never going to get a set of creeps that aren't vulnerable to that. And it just seems to be incredibly efficient. Like, at the maximum level of those things is much, much better than the same amount of money spent on level 1 turrets, which is usually the other way around. Usually it would be investing in one turret is less efficient on your money, but better because that location is a good one. You know, so you're investing it in the right location is worth it, and investing it in the wrong location is a real waste. That may still be true, like, technically in terms of the total value, but the locations are so good that having a good turret in one place is way, way better than spending your money on the rest of them. And so everything else I can build, I think there's probably, like, there's an Inferno turret that does better damage to groups of enemies. There's a laser turret that does better damage to fast enemies. There's a cannon, which is really long range and good against single boss enemies. But the gun's just good against all of them. And if they were all the same price as the gun, it would be kind of like, not really sure which to build, because the gun's pretty good against everything, but these are good against one specific thing. But all the specialist stuff is much more expensive than the gun. The gun's just cheaper than everything. So it's just, well, I'll build the gun then. I'll just keep building guns. And I can't see a reason why I wouldn't do that. And that got me through all of Defense Grid 1. And I thought Defense Grid 2, well, surely they've probably addressed this, and probably the gun has been nerfed in some way, but it seems to be just as good. And I'm going through it. Actually, Alec Meir is beating my score at the moment, so I'd be interested to know what strategy he uses. But it does a really semi-brilliant, semi-cruel thing where as you're playing, in real time, it's showing you not just your friend's score, but what your friend's score was at this point in time. So you see your friend's score going up as your score goes up, and if it goes above you, like, what? What did they do? Like, at this point, they obviously did something that I didn't do, so I've got to figure out what that was.
That's nuts. Is it made by Hidden Path?
Yeah.
They do a bunch of stuff for Valve, don't they?
Yeah, didn't they do CSGO?
They did a bunch. I don't know if they did all of CSGO, just they did the maps, and also they did.
It's weird in like CSGO DLC as well. Like the only thing worth buying is guns.
Strange loophole discovered in CS.
Yeah, they did maps for Counter-Strike Source as well, and I think they did that like crossover DLC for Left 4 Dead 2.
Yeah,
and that kind of thing. They're odd company.
Yeah. I guess they're in Seattle.
Yes. I guess maybe they're former Valve devs. I wonder if they're people who left the studio and set up their own thing.
Maybe. Or like one of those studios that Valve sort of props up, like former modders, that kind of thing. I'm speculating.
When did Defense Grid 2 come out?
I think in September. But Eurogamer only just reviewed it, so I thought it had only just come out. So I was like, "Oh, cool, that's out!" And I should download and play it. But this is getting to be a big problem with games, isn't it? Like,
yeah, I thought it came out like 2 years ago. I didn't realise it was a new.
No, we just reviewed it as well. Like,
oh wow, I ran a website. Shit.
This is the thing. Like, you two are games journalists. I work in games and follow them closely, and everyone I follow on Twitter works in games in some capacity. Well, not everyone, but I follow a very large number of people who work in games, and yet the constant story of every game is, I didn't know that was out. I didn't know that had come out. Is that one out yet? I don't know.
I even know their PR. She used to do PR for Hawken, so I've met her.
I think the thing with Defense Grid is that, like, tower defense, there were so many of them for so long. And Defense Grid was like a standout example of a very good tower defense game. There are others. Auction Must Die is a very good tower defense game, the first one.
Anomaly Wars on Earth is good. kind of
tower offense.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were lots of good games, but at the same time, it was one of those genres that you wouldn't feel pressured to cover every game that came out because so many of them were so samey or whatever. So it was sort of easy for things to feel like a blind spot. Like, oh, we don't need to cover tower defense games. It's just building towers, isn't it? But that kind of reduction logic can apply to all games. But yeah, I think it's interesting that it's it feels like a little bit of maybe like a swan song for that genre. Like, I don't know if there's mileage left in the tower defense formula, really.
The thing that I'm interested in is, I'm probably going to find this out actually, is like, should you find out all of the information that is available about the power of these towers and what they're good at and how much the upgrades are worth in terms of cost efficiency? Because this, like, when I was playing it before, I actually wasn't really enjoying it until I found out that tip about standard guns, because I was just placing stuff and I couldn't tell whether it was being effective or not. Like, I would lose, and then I'm like, okay, well, something I did was ineffective. But when I actually watch a flamethrower hit a bunch of creeps and their health bar goes down by like 2%, I don't know, is that good? Is 2% good? Should it be doing more? Obviously it hasn't killed them, I need to fix more turrets than that, but like, I don't know if that interaction in itself was that high value or not. Was that, when it says it's good against groups, is that groups of 2 or groups of 7? And so all that information is out there. I can find it out from wikis and stuff. And at first I was not doing that because I thought, well, that's the game. I've got to figure out, it's up to me to find out what's efficient. But the game just doesn't give me enough data. I just don't know. I look at it and I just see health bars going down. That's not a thing I can easily quantify to the level of precision I would need to judge the efficiency of one turret versus another, particularly because after the first wave, every cluster of troops is now different, because the first one was hit by all the guns, the second one was hit by slightly fewer, and then depending on whether the first one was already dead by then, the second one might get more flak, and so it's all different after the first interaction. And so there's just so much chaos and so little data that I don't know how I'm supposed to get better at that. So now I'm thinking maybe that's not the game. Maybe you're supposed to just look up all the data, find out all the information, and then once you have all that information, the game is, okay, I know an Inferno turret is 2.6 times more effective than a gun turret as long as it's placed near this length of track, and where can I place it so it will be?
Maybe the friend score live thing helps with that a little bit, because it does help pinpoint exact moments where people pull their head or fell behind. Or
I tried to, when I got to the end of a level and it told me Alec beat me, I tried to click his name to see if I could watch like a replay of him playing it, because that would be great, but I don't think that's in there.
I mean, like, there's sort of two sides to this. Like, the appeal of these games, which is also similar to the appeal of something like Space Chem as well, like a lot of engineering or process building games, like Factorio or whatever, is like half perfecting it, like finding the mathematically optimal solution, and half being creative and coming up with your own solutions to things. Like that, I think I played most of Defense Grid 1, but I stopped when I realized that the things I was doing as standard for a long time wouldn't carry me any further. Like, the techniques that I'd come up with were inefficient in a way that I could no longer get away with. But changing that at that point felt like, oh, now I have to relearn this entire game. Like, all the information I have so far is totally useless now. Like, and that was sort of unsatisfying. So I don't know how sustainable the just do it your own way thing is, but it's an interesting kind of like swings between extremes. Like, there's the argument that goes, I just like flamethrowers. Like, I just want to do it with flamethrowers, versus actually mathematically it's this.
Yeah, what I want it to be is, like, each different location has different reasons why you might want to put a particular turret there. So that one in the middle is a really good place for a cannon because it can shoot everything in the whole level. Or it might be a good place for a very upgraded gun turret because that can't shoot everything in the level, but it shoots a lot of the track that goes near it. And then when I do that, I want to see it. Like, I want to see that being effective. I want to see that cannon kill every single thing it shoots. And maybe have like a kill count on it and, like numbers about what was working out, what wasn't. And when a flame turret hits a group of enemies, I want to see them all fry. I want to actually get a sense of, oh, that was really effective.
What I want, and there's probably a tower defense game that does this, but I would like a level which is endless, and then I choose when I want the wave of creeps that's coming to get harder. So that I can place turrets and I'm winning, I'm stable, but what happens if I do this? And try and make it more efficient. And only once I've experimented, and that would give me more data, and I would be able to study and see, okay, this works better. Now, give me a harder wave, and start that coming in against that wall I've built, and then I can do it again, basically.
Yeah.
I would like a game that was that, rather than Oh, you've completed the level. Start again from scratch.
Because it's a pretty easy thing to judge as well. Like in some games, you wouldn't necessarily have a sense of like, should the game be harder? Like in an FPS or something, like waves of enemies, you might feel like you only just survived, but actually you could have taken on loads more. But in a tower defense game, you can literally see on the map they got this close, and then they all die. So let's see what, like, I know I can make it harder now. And also you'll be able to compare more easily when you make a change. Oh, last time they got this far, this time they didn't.
Yep.
Yeah, really good. The thing they try and do is, you can summon a wave early, and then you get extra points for that, in desktop tower defense at least. In Defense Grid, you can fast forward, and I'm never clear as to whether I'm being rewarded for that. Because usually, it's a tower defense trope that if you send a wave early, you get a bonus for doing that. Like, well done, you were ready before you needed to be. But Defense Grid doesn't explicitly tell you you're getting a bonus for that, and maybe that's a balance thing, because if you're that good that you want the wave early, maybe you shouldn't be extra rewarded, because that reward is directly funding your new turrets and stuff.
I think, isn't it just that when you've got a stable system, it's so that you can sort of fast forward to the
Yeah, I guess so.
Like, you have to just watch one monster walk really slowly around your maze.
I should check, actually, to see if Defense Grid has other game modes and stuff, because it seems like the kind of thing where the core game is simple enough that they've probably thought about this stuff.
What have you been playing, Chris?
I have been playing... Well, I've been away from the podcast for like 2 weeks for various reasons. So in that time, I played Alien Isolation. Well, at least the first couple of hours of it. And Middle-earth Shadows of Mordor. Game, I believe, you have not discussed at all 2 weeks in a row.
3 weeks in a row.
3 weeks in a row. So I'm not going to talk about them. Because I don't think I have anything to say about them that hasn't already been said. Probably. I want to talk about Civilization Beyond Earth, which... At the time that you're probably listening to this, presuming this goes up on Friday, will be out today, basically. I've been playing an early build. And it's an interesting game. So, full sort of disclosure of how much I've played. I've played one campaign so far for the first, just coming up on 200 turns. And 200 turns sounds like a hell of a lot, but it's really not in Civ terms. And particularly in this game, for reasons I want to get into, I spent a lot of that time clicking next turn to kind of move to the next interesting event happening. Many years on the space colony are just good years. Yep. keep on trucking. Literal trucks. And yeah, so there's a lot of just sort of like, yep, I'm fine with this, I'm fine with this. Part of that is down to playstyle. And part of my playstyle is down to the mood and aesthetics of the game, which is really interesting to me. So hopefully it will be. So the premise is that the game takes off literally where, Civ 5 campaigns would end. So it's a post-space victory. Although in a slightly different context, the idea is that Earth is sort of drained of its resources and needs to be abandoned. And lots of, a planet is located, the randomly generated planet is located that humanity might find a new home on, and ships go off, colony ships go off to colonize it, with lots of people in cryo. And rather than picking a faction, like you used to, like a historical nation, you first pick a sponsor, which is from a sort of series of, fictional, sort of like, almost like mega corporations or pan-national bodies based on existing Earth cultures. So there's like a European one, an American one, that are hilariously, literally the Illuminati, complete with pyramid eye. Like, an Indian subcontinent one, Asia, and, Australia and Pacific Islands and things like that, South America. And, they give you sort of like, so that's your first choice, and that's one set of bonuses, usually just like a single perk. So for me, I'm playing as like the European faction, and when they get a certain amount of, traits, which are the passive bonuses you get for leveling up culture, you get a free technology that you can currently access. So you can just get a free, expensive technology for nothing. There's lots of things like that. And then you pick, I think after that you pick the cargo that your ship was carrying. So you can have like special cargo that gives you something new when you're on the ground. You pick the nature of the people who are traveling on your ship, like artists, scientists, soldiers, whatever, that changes some bonus about your initial starting civilization. And then you choose something that's attached to the ship itself. So I chose retrograde thrusters, which means you've got a bigger area to pick where your capital city lands.
Oh, nice.
Because your first one sort of descends onto your capital city descends from space at the beginning of the campaign. And, rather than discover factions as your explorers move around the map, other ships land. Like, the conceit seems to be that you're the first to land, and then other ships land after you. But because of the technology at the time, There is fog of war, which makes borderline sense given that you were literally just in orbit. But so you can't necessarily see landmasses or whatever, but you can always see when another faction lands. And so all that stuff, that beginning feels sort of promising and quite different. And then what follows is quite weird, because it feels a shitload like Civ. Like, it really is Civ at the start. All of the resources are just analogies for civilization resources. The early units and buildings are all exact analogies for early Civ buildings. And so, even though, for example, a group of Marines is still a melee unit, in the same way that your initial, clubman might be. Your explorers still do explorer things. They can do a few new things, but functionally, you still have that guy you put on auto explore to figure out the map, right? You're like, instead of building a temple in your cities, you might build an old Earth relic. And they're sort of, it's one-to-one match and it's deeply familiar. Trade routes work very similarly to how they work in, one of the Civ 4 or 5 expansions. I've forgotten exactly which one. And so that kind of thing means that it's really easy to initially fall into the trap of just playing it like Civ, and that works to a greater or lesser extent. There are some interesting like planet types and stuff, and barbarians work slightly differently, because barbarians are now aliens, like indigenous species, and your relationship with those species does change some political things, which hasn't really been the case before.
Barbaliens.
My god. They include like huge siege worms and stuff. But it's so much like Civ that I found myself in this weird position where I've always played Civ with a view to like creating, like, I want to create this kind of civilization. Like, I always have a victory condition in mind. And it's more of an aesthetic choice. It's like, I want to see if I can make a protective sort of like society of philosopher kings that eventually jet off into space, right? Or, whatever. But in regular Civ, I've always felt that like the best way to play the early part of the game is to be quite aggressive. Like to not necessarily be massively warlike, but secure your territory, kick out the barbarians, get as much gold as you can, maybe even take over a few neighbours, you know what I mean, if you're in early cities. And the reason I've always felt comfortable with that in Civ is because it's simulating the breadth of human civilization starting from like the Bronze Age. And in the Bronze Age, you can sort of not justify, but you can sort of like explain away in your mind why people would immediately go on the offensive and play that way. And all those options are applicable to Beyond Earth, and they are possible, but they feel really weird because they feel totally counter to the fiction and the world you're taking part in. There is no obvious need for competition or conflict between the factions at all, and you've all just left a planet that has been devastated by resource wars and climate change. So like, maybe, like, the first thing you do when you land shouldn't be, like, gun factory, now! Like, there's sort of a degree to which, like, being an asshole is so, like, off-putting that, like, the reason that my 180-odd turns have been rather uneventful is I landed and I'm like, I'm just going to do sensible things. Like, I'm going to invest in technology that allows me to understand the world and take advantage of its resources. I'm going to protect my borders with sonic fences rather than a military. I'm going to make allies with everybody. Trade routes with everybody, because, we're all fucking human. I'm going to just research science and, like, network technology, communications technology, which means kind of a culture victory thing. And as a result, I've sort of come into real serious conflict with no one. Like, I've never seen the combat system yet, because there's been no reason to fight anything. And I'm sort of enjoying it, but it's the fiction, strangely, has amplified the things that can be hugely passive about Civ, and the things that can lead to scenarios where you go hundreds of turns without really making an interesting decision. And it tries to countermand this with, like, choose your own adventure style pop-ups, where it's like, something's happened and you have to respond to it, or, hey, you've invented the internet. And, you've established a networked society now. Reinvented, I guess. Do you want this to be like, military channels only, or do you want it to be open to everybody? And so it's like, well, I'm not a dickhead. So, like, I'm not going to create space North Korea. So, like, I'm just going to make it open to everybody. And the differences in what you get might be like, if you click one of them, it's like, military units build slightly faster, like bonus production for military buildings. The other one might be bonus production for structures. And I can see the way in which, if you play a load of it, those decisions are important. But honestly, in the time when you're often asked to make them, they're more interesting for what they say about you in terms of your personality than they are in terms of the stats that they give you. But because it feels like, at least to me, the tone and mood and atmosphere of the game channels you down a particular set of sort of personality traits. You'd have to. I don't know. So far, I've never really been comfortable picking the "I'm a dickhead" option.
Are your personality traits, or is that just purely in your own mind representing the civilization, or are they? Does the game respond?
It responds in a way like. So there is a system called affinity now, which is sort of like religion used to be, where as you make certain research decisions, it's sort of like it sits on top of everything the game does. So research buildings. I don't think it sits on top of diplomacy, but it certainly interacts with some of the upgrade paths you go down. You get XP in one of 3 categories, which are purity, supremacy, and affinity. And as you level up in those categories, they change your units. So affinity is like, getting to, bioengineering and stuff, and eventually you have like part alien units and stuff. And supremacy is like cyborgs and robots, and purity is like exosuits, and the human inside is still human, and that kind of thing. And each of them leads to a different victory condition. But you can be diplomatic and be any of them. Like, there's no kind of, it's not like the war one, the peace one, and the trade one, or whatever.
How much do you actually choose? Like, when you're saying you gain XP in all 3 of them, is it the thing where would you ever be in a situation where you'd kind of like to go down the purity route, but your decisions drive you towards one of the others?
Not as far as I can tell. Like, I think everyone gets, like, so there's a thing that happens, and I think this reveals something about the way the game works. Like, occasionally you get messages from the AI that don't have like a demand attached or a question. They're just like, hey, I think we should be nice to the aliens. And particularly, I had, like, early in the game, I got a message from every single other colony leader. It was the same message, and it was, I think the aliens are kind of rad. Maybe we shouldn't shoot them with guns.
Maybe the mind control worms got loose. Everyone listen. We think the aliens are rad. Yeah. Make friends with the aliens without wearing helmets.
All hail the Hypnocello. I think that the reason for that is because something I noticed was, like, I think it's the first time you build a clinic. It's one of the kind of early, like, farm equivalent buildings where it's like, it's to do with, like, domestication or agriculture on the new world. That gives you, like, 1 rank in affinity straight away. So, I think everyone gets that, because it's just a building you naturally build and everything. So everyone starts off by getting, like, their 1 point in affinity. And this apparently causes the NPCs to bark, aliens are great! Even if they then go off and do different things. Then you do have to chase down particular technologies. And the way the technology tree works now is it's now a web. That you start in the middle and you branch out in a million different directions. And at the end of every, like, line of the web is, they're called branches and leaves, but that doesn't make any sense with the spider analogy. So, which is a shame. But like, there's like nodes, and each node has like sub-technologies. So you might go down the branch to get to engineering, but under engineering there's like 4 or 5 different technologies that are optional, but attached to that. So once you unlock them, once you've unlocked the main thing. And those are the ones that have faction affiliations.
I see.
So an example would be like, I think there's one where you go to like, I think more advanced fabrication, and under fabrication you can get like, habitation domes, and habitation domes are a purity thing because they keep the atmosphere out and they keep the kind of alien environment out. So like, chasing terraforming is a purity thing, whereas chasing like, robot suits like human augmentation is a supremacy thing, and I don't know, eating mushrooms is an affinity thing. Like, and that is pretty choice based. Like, I don't think it'd be possible to, I think there are probably going to be strategies that are more compatible with one affinity than another, so you probably naturally find yourself trending that way. But that's interesting, the way that they kind of feed off each other and feed into each other. I think I was hoping for a more dramatically different experience from the early game. And I've sort of read the experiences of other people already, and I know that there are subtleties to be uncovered. But I suspect that, especially when players get their hands on it for the first time, it will struggle to shake an early impression of, this is a Civ reskin.
It's funny, like, when you first said that, I was thinking, that's a bit depressing, really. Like, I understand that, like, the game mechanically might be similar to Civ because that was a successful game and they're not trying to totally change it. But just from a fiction point of view, isn't it sad that we land on a new planet with all the best technology we've developed over thousands and thousands of years, that we'll be back to basically the Bronze Age and basically doing exactly the same
That's
thing?
the thing, right? Like, it's sort of like, I get it from a game. Basically, I think, I suspect, I want to play more of it. I want to try and get to the bottom of some of this stuff. I also really want to play Endless Legend, which looks fucking great. And that's kind of weird that they've come out quite close to each other, and I'm more attracted to, I think, Endless Legend at the moment. But it's like, the fiction is a cool one, and I want to engage with that. But at the moment, it still feels like, ultimately, I'm playing Civ, and the things that might make it different have cropped up, but haven't been noticeable enough to make me feel like I'm actually, playing a different game. Like, there's an orbital layer now where you can launch satellites from cities that might give you power in an area, or push back the alien miasma that drains your health and stuff like that. And after some time, the satellites crash back to Earth. Well, not to Earth, to whatever planet. I think mine's called Magellan. Which is a cool idea, and apparently if another culture can find your satellite, then they can get some information about your culture. So there's stuff like that. It's a neat idea. But I found loads of information about the other culture by just sending spies there. Which sort of which is the Civ thing. And so the sort of like the new idea sits nice on paper, but in the game I just did Civ things. And that's a balance I'd like to see it unpick. Like, I want to get to the point where it's like, shit, I wouldn't have ever thought to do this.
I was really hoping that the planets that you would be on would be really strange and radically different, and it wouldn't just be a different colour of mountain, that there would be strange things going on.
Yeah.
And the aliens would be a really important concern, and that the different factions would be radically different from just, I'm a bit European.
Yeah, the factions are very
from
similar.
India.
Yeah, the factions are very, very similar. That's the thing, because they're all like sort of post-globalization humans, and it's like, like, so we're slightly different, but we're not that different. The thing is, as well, like, I have, I guess, maybe brought this on myself a little bit, because I picked the sort of default planet type, which is Terran, which is like, Earth-like. So it is just the world, but the mountains are a bit purple, and the seas are a bit green. There is also like a desert one, I think, and like a Pangaea continent where everything's on one big continent, and like an Atlantean one where everything's a lot of small islands. But all those options are available in Civ as well.
Yeah.
Like, the other thing is, like, the thing with the aliens is they sort of move around in these herds, like big in packs. Like, you see these deserts, and like every hex has a pack of like scuttling aliens on. And I quickly got upgrades that meant that they leave me alone. So like, I've got sonic fence around all my civilization, so they can't get in most of the time. And I had an option to pick a passive upgrade that extended my sonic fences further, or made my sonic fences apply to my trade caravans wherever my trade caravans went. So I put it on my trade caravans, and so like I've just gotten this like, yeah, we just peacefully coexist. I just drive past them now. So I ignored them, the aliens that might have posed a threat, the ones on the ground. And in the sea, you occasionally see like, it'll say like alien sea dragon, and you see this huge like double-mouthed sea serpent roll past. And like, my instinct isn't, I should kill that. It's like, I'm not going to click on that. And often if you like click into the fog of war, and what you've ended up doing is actually having done a combat move, it'll pop up to say, you sure you meant to do this? And so often it's like, nah. Like, I think that's the thing. A lot of my decisions so far have been actually nah. And that's not like necessarily the...
It's hilarious that like, the fantasy is, we've transcended Earth and we're leaving for a new planet and better worlds, and they've literally just sort of transplanted the different countries and gone directly up from each one in a different ship, and then landed on a new ship and a new planet, all in different locations. Like, well, let's get back to being a nation.
Yeah, it's sort of like you're developing the sequel to Earth, but at some point during the development of the sequel, someone from the studios come in and gone like, we really need to hit the core strengths of what Earth is really all about.
Nationalism.
Like, yeah. When people think of Earth, they don't really think of this kind of like Brave New Future thing. Like, it's a cool idea, I get where you're coming from, but what we need is wars, factionalism, religious and ideological differences, and racism. Like, that'd be swell. That'd really get them buying tickets. Like, that's I guess the thing is like, it's sort of, it's not really civilization beyond Earth. Well, actually, no, it literally is. It's just civilization not on Earth. So, but as I said, like, I think it's probably one of those games that reveals its details and its interesting quirks and the stuff that generates the cool stories with a bit of time. So I'm going to persevere.
There's one game that does seem to at least justify the reasons why you might want to go to war is At the Gates by the designer of which is John Schaefer, who was the lead designer on Civ 5. And he left to go indie, and the game he's making is about being a barbarian tribe just before the fall of the Roman Empire. So you are at the gates of the Roman Empire, and you are just like a tiny little camp. You only have one settlement. I can't remember if that's universally true for the whole game, or whether you can eventually expand. Probably you can. But you can move it, and you kind of have to, because you'll start near like a food source, and you have a farm on it. And then that'll just run dry, or just run out of food. And then you've got to move because there's just nothing else around. And the landscape is really barren, like it's really rare to find anything good at all. And there are seasons, and during winter, you obviously the land has less food, and also your units lose health if they're out of supply. And the land has kind of an inherent amount of supply. Like a standard unit only needs 1, but a mounted unit needs 2 supply. And then in winter, I think the land just has less supply, so your unit's just going to die if they're not in your own territory. And they just recently revealed the new art style for it, which was, it looked sort of okay before, but it was, if you're going to compare it to Civ, it would be like, all of the mechanics sound like the interface stuff was really slick, and it looked like, you know, he had learned all of the lessons from Civ and made it as easy to use as that. And the mechanics sounded like he was bored of Civ and wanted to make something much more brutal and kind of that actually had difficult decisions every turn, wasn't just click end turn, end turn, end turn, because you had so much to worry about. But the art style was the one thing where you thought, well, that's an indie game. That's clearly not Civ. But now the new art style they've announced is it's styled like a watercolor on a piece of parchment. And so the fog of war is just the bit of the parchment that hasn't been painted yet. And all of their stuff is like, it's really watercolor, such that a lot of stuff like Diablo 3 has watercolor backdrops, and then the characters themselves are really crisply detailed and stand out loads in the backdrop. This doesn't have that. Like, the characters themselves are also watercolored and kind of look like they're painted onto the backdrop. So it's not trying to look sort of realistic at all, but it's beautiful. And the way it kind of like fades out gently into the parchment at the edges of the fog of war is just so nice. And comparing that, going back to like the clouds of Civ, I always found them a little bit like intrusive, like it was putting something on top of the map to hide what the map, rather than this, which feels almost like you're creating the map as you go around. And stuff that you know about but haven't explored yet. One of the other things they wanted to change about Civ was when you start, they wanted you to have interesting decisions to make right away. So rather than having to explore to find out what's nearby, you already know what's nearby. So like figuring out where to place your settlement is a big decision because that you have to make right away, because you can already see what your options are. But that stuff, because you haven't explored it, is done as like a pencil sketch outside of the painting. So it's on the canvas, but it's not, hasn't been painted in yet because you haven't seen it yet. So there's all kinds of neat like analogies like that.
That's awesome.
That is not, well, so it's not out, but you can technically get hold of it. There's sort of a paid alpha that was originally a Kickstarter benefit, and you can still get it. But he strongly recommends not doing that if you just want to have fun. Like, that's just a thing to help him out. It's not a thing that you should actually do.
I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm really looking forward to the game from Soren Johnson, who was the lead designer on Civ 4.
And that is Off-World.
Yes, Off-World Trading Company.
Yeah.
It's set on Mars, and it's mostly designed around multiplayer. I don't even know if it's got single player.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it.
Must do, but it's pitched mostly as a competitive economic strategy game where you're on Mars and there are like 9 different resources and you're competing in order to get those resources and then trade them with the other players. And depending on how much of it you control, and how in demand it is, that determines a stock market, basically, or the prices of those different resources. So if you control all the water on the planet, you can charge loads for it and make a ton of money if your other players desperately need it. That sounds like a really interesting idea for a game. A kind of multiplayer RTS where you spend time looking at graphs and watching the values of things crash and peak and stuff like that. Peak oil as a game. It's
funny that they both went sort of very specialised. They both picked something that was much more focused and much more. I mean, it makes perfect sense being indie, having come from a huge team. But it also means that both their games just seem more interesting than Beyond Earth from what we've heard about it anyway. Like, it seems like neither of those could be accused of just being Civ all over again. They're both definitely doing something new, which also makes sense in terms of, like, why would you leave for Axis if you wanted to make a turn-based strategy game? Well, if you didn't want to make the turn-based strategy game they were going to make next.
Anyone who I've ever spoken to who's worked on Civ says that all the problems with it are because it is so broad, like trying to simulate all of human history is just an idea for a game that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Like, it's really appealing to people, so it sells lots of copies, but actually trying to make that as a video game is insane. And that's why you get, like, such weird abstraction, and then just, I mean, Sid Meier's whole thing is meant to be video games are just a series of interesting decisions, and Civilization is almost always just a series of boring decisions, but every 200 turns, something good.
There's, like, it's like combat makes it interesting, and combat, especially, like, combat turns it into more of an interesting strategy game, at least, you know, rather than, because all the other victories are basically based on filling a bar faster than the other guy, and there are decisions you make in order to allow you to fill the bar faster, but, like, they haven't come up with a way of displaying your progress in a way that isn't a bar filling up. And to have a setting that fights the notion that combat is the most interesting thing you could do is weird. I think the thing is, like, there's this precedent for Sid Meier putting his name to games that are more specialized. Pirates, for example, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think Beyond Earth, I'd like to see post-Earth Colony Simulator 2000. You know? Like, there's a kind of, there is something in that, but I don't think the Civ model is necessarily right for it, because in that scenario you don't need to simulate every aspect of human civilization, because, you know, interstate espionage is probably not going to be a huge factor straight away.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's one of the first things I built, and I have spies in every other city, or most of them. And it's like, I don't even know really why I have them. It's just that I have them, so that they needed something to do. Like, apparently there were some spies on my ship when I came over, and they were bored, so it's like, what should we do? Steal secrets? Like,
that's all I know. It would be kind of interesting if, like, Beyond Earth, you landed on a new planet, you're just exploring, and then there are alien factions who, like, don't necessarily have cities in the traditional sense, but just have, like, you know, a hive or something that is completely different to your own settlement, and you have to deal with it in different ways. And then, like, that's, like, half the game, and then halfway through, that's when the next human race lands, and you didn't know they were coming, and you thought you were the only one, and you're just like, who the fuck are they?
Yeah, I think, so, having only played one campaign, I don't know what degree the arrival of other human races is randomized. I think the thing that would make it kind of rad, very un-Civ, but would make it more interesting to me, is if, when you picked your sponsor at the start, you were assigned a victory condition, or maybe you pick one. But you had, like, one way to win, basically, that you had to stick to.
Yeah.
And when the other factions land, you don't know what their victory conditions are, and whether they're going to play into yours or play against yours. Like, some level of ambiguity, because instead you sort of feel it out. You kind of see what they're doing. It's like, oh, that guy's going for affinity. I'm going to keep an eye on him, or whatever. But you don't have that. It kind of, I think, needs that, like, you know, you need the kind of the bad corporation that's come over that's here to exploit the planet or undermine the other colonies, and the drama of figuring out which civ it is that's going to cause that problem. Whereas in my game, there's sort of two global factions, really. Like, there's me and two other factions that are all powerful and allied with each other, and we haven't allied with the others, and war has been declared a few times, but I've just said, like, why? Like, every time someone's like,
war! Why?
Don't know. But they haven't really affected anything. I think, it kind of needs that sort of, like, game of werewolf aspect to it.
It almost makes sense, like, if you have a corporate sponsor, that they would come to you with a corporate agenda and say,
yeah, like, you should have to...
We'll only pay for you if, when you get there, you're going to fuck over all the other guys and own it for us.
But in this interesting way, right? Yeah. Like, your goal is to get a trade network together and then control all the markets, or your goal is
that'd be great.
See, I would have that, but then I would have it at, like, turn 200 or something like that. The aliens burst out of the ground, and the alien force is so great and so threatening that you have no choice but to team up with the other factions. And then it becomes about, you have to work with the other factions to defeat the aliens, but also meet the target set to you by your corporate sponsor and not the corporate sponsors of your co-op buddies or whatever.
Yeah,
trying to do both
something like that. And admittedly, like there are lots of choose your own adventure things in it that I haven't seen yet, and so maybe there's something like that. But I think it needs to be more substantially game wide. Like I think when you see a ship land, you don't need to just see like a potential enemy or ally. You need to see like another potential agenda. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that person's come down with a plan, and I need to know what it is. Like,
there are great events in Galciv for stuff like this. They're called super events, and there are things like one race could just find an artifact that meant from now until the end of time, they're just going to get more powerful militarily. Their stuff is just going to get better and better and better and better and better and never stop. And so it's like, okay, well, we have to kill them now or do something else. And then one of them was a galaxy-wide plague, and just everyone is infected. All people all the way across the galaxy have been infected by plague that was hitherto unseen and has only just been diagnosed, and it's too late. Everyone already has it, and their populations are all going to drop, and the cure is just added to the tech tree, and it's really hard to research. So whoever has the best research capability can research the cure, and then they can trade it to other races, and it's like the most valuable tech in the world, because everyone just literally needs it to live. So you can just say, nope, not giving it to you guys, no matter what you ask. And then if you actually want to eliminate a faction that way, you would have to not trade your cure to anybody else, because they could trade it to the other faction and keep them alive. So you could, but then if you don't trade it to anybody, then everyone's just going to gang up on you, or someone else is going to get there first and research it and then trade it away.
Yeah. This is a total tangent, but the thing we were just talking about, corporate agendas, reminded me of a conversation I had about isolation, and it's the only thing I wanted to talk about isolation that I hope we haven't covered yet, which is, so isolation's introduction, where this is a total change, so we can go back to Civ in a second, but where you are exploring, like, Sevastopol, and some kind of disaster has happened and forced graffiti to be
Sevastopol!
Yeah.
Just let that sink in for a while. Up there, when you're Barbaliens.
Okay. And some sort of spray paint accident has happened. Like, when you arrive, and you have this weird thing where they deal with it in a relatively classy way, which is they sort of get to the alien quite quickly, and they have Ripley, like in the film, ask almost all of the right questions, which is rare, and it's sort of a Ripley family trait. Like, probably the only horror protagonists that are ever always asking exactly the right question, especially in the original movie. But you, the player, know what game you bought, right? The reveal of what has happened on the station is never going to be a surprise to you.
There's a what? I'm alone with a what?
I only ever read the second word in titles. So, and I was talking to Marsh about this, and I think, so, they should either do this as, like, DLC, or they should have been the game, or whatever, or Alien game. You should do the Alien Survival on a Space Station game that starts pre-disaster, or just pre-disaster, where you don't play a Ripley-type character. You play Burke or Ash. You play the Weyland-Yutani plant that is there to capture the alien, crew expendable. Because then, when people start to go missing in the maintenance department or whatever, and I was like, what's going on? And the game's trying to do the kind of like, something has happened and no one knows what it is. You do know. Because that's the information you were sent there with. And to marry up the players' foreknowledge of the game they bought with their character's knowledge by having their character be a complete dickhead. Who's just like, I couldn't tell him what's happening downstairs.
Really interesting asymmetric multiplayer, because there's been stuff like The Hidden, say, which had essentially a team of Marines versus just one really superpowered supernatural being. But it would be really interesting if the team of Marines then had different roles within it, and so there was one person who just wanted to kill it and one person who wanted to capture it and who was trying to stop their teammates from killing it so that they could do that, but you didn't know who had that agenda.
And again, coming back to Werewolf, I think there's a role in one of the versions of it where your objective, you're not a werewolf, but your objective is to get everybody killed. Like, you genuinely are a human, but you need them all to get killed by the werewolf for some reason.
Asshole. That's the thing, like, I think that, I love mechanics like that, and I think, even in that case, applying it to a single player thing could be really dramatically interesting, not only in terms of aligning the player with the character they're controlling, but in terms of, like, controlling the kinds of power the player has. It's not just that you don't have or use guns because you are, you don't find them or they don't work, but because they're counter to your main objective. You know what I mean? You have to, like, that'd be a really interesting horror game to make, where it's like, I'm going to try and not get killed, but I have to get quite a lot of other people killed because I do really want to capture that thing. I think that'd be really interesting.
That'll be right.
Yeah. But yeah, and Civ needs, basically what I'm saying is everything in games needs more corporate agenda, conspiracy, mystery. Everything outside of games is dramatically less of it.
This is definitely true.
I think I was already playing Alien Isolation that way, in that I would just... My greatest pleasure in it was seeing other people get mauled by the alien. I would hide from the alien was my first priority. But then if I felt like I was safe and I could see the alien was, walking around and getting close to some other civilians running around, I would leave my hiding place and take a more risky one just so I could watch them get destroyed. I actually got myself killed doing that, because I was there was a mission where, one of the first times you encountered the alien, and that your next objective is to leave via a train station, and, there's the tram that was there to pick me up was already there, but there was loads of different trams, and there were two civilians who, something had bugged out in some way, because they were it looked like I was supposed to talk to them, but then they suddenly just ran at me screaming, ran towards me screaming. And the alien was behind me, but not close. And then they were just cowering in fear. And so I was about to get on my station, and I was like, I wonder what happens when the alien actually gets here. So I was just hiding in one train, looking out, and from my perspective I could just see the hallway beyond. And I would see both of them run screaming to the right, and then, 30 seconds later, the alien would slowly stalk to the right, and then you'd see both of them run screaming to the left. And you'd see the alien stalking slowly to the left. And he never caught them, I don't know why. And then eventually, they went back and forth, in a sort of comedy fashion, 3 or 4 times. And then one time when the alien was stalking to the right, he just turned around and was like, "Ah!" and then mauled me. So I guess I got my moral comeuppance.
I was really weirded out. Those same two guys got out of the train, and I was weirded out by the fact that they seemed to be identical, and they both looked like actor Nick Frost.
I didn't notice that.
Shall we do questions from questions?
Inevitably.
The Holy Penguin asks, Dear Creighton Crowbar, king of the wrong tree, if you think there are any decent puns left by now.
Oh! You can talk.
Meta puns.
Disaster Paul.
Disaster Paul, yes.
I love playing games where listening to music, but for many games I'm currently playing, this is unsuitable. Playing Deus Ex Human Revolution isn't quite the same, with reggae drowning out all the game sounds, and the appeal of The Walking Dead diminishes somewhat when you can't make out what anyone is saying. Spelunky, Pool Nation, and Pro Evo 6 on the PS2 are particularly old faithfuls for me when I'm just in the mood to listen to something while enjoying the feel of the game, but I'm in the mood for something else. What should I add to this list? What games do you enjoy chilling with while listening to music?
So I do this a lot. I play my own music instead of the game music. Partly because I often dislike the game music. Not just as music, but also as a tonal clash in terms of what I want from it. And so, not that long ago, I was looking for a composer for my own game, Heat Signature, and I had a huge number of samples to go through. And obviously, one of the ways I was reviewing them, the best ones, I was listening to them in-game to see which ones suited the game best. So just playing the game, listening to the track, seeing if it was good, and then moving on to the next one, seeing if that suited it better. And this drove me somewhat insane, because there were so many samples. It took weeks and weeks of doing this. And by the end of it, I didn't know what music was. I had no opinions on anything. Just everything seemed great or exactly the same. And during that time, that was about when Shake It Off by Taylor Swift came out.
Yeah.
And we were all listening to that pretty much on a loop, just no matter what we were doing. And then...
Wait, you mean all of games journalism?
Yeah. And so, I thought, okay, I'll try this as music for Heat Signature. Does that work? Does fucking Taylor Swift even work in my space game? Do I have opinions about anything? Is anything incongruous? So I tried Shake It Off in Heat Signature, and it fucking worked. It was great. And then I saw Guardians of the Galaxy, and I was like, oh, this is a movie about that.
Oh man, I guess so. I have dedicated playlists for moments where I need to get shit done in competitive multiplayer games. I have a playlist on Spotify that is all caps montage, and it's Gold by Spandau Ballet, and Eye of the Tiger and Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins. That was actually created to get me up a rank in Blade Symphony, because I'd been defeated a few times in a row, and I needed something to kind of to get me through the next couple of duels. So that's the kind of the upper register stuff. I've been playing a lot of MMOs. I've been playing a lot of Destiny, but it applies to any other game with a lot of kind of like gentle repetitive tasks. There are loads of hour-long, 2-hour-long like chill out house playlists and stuff. Most of them are all right. Like very rarely you find ones that are actually like really good, but sometimes. On YouTube and on SoundCloud and on Spotify even actually. And so I listen to a lot of like chill out and deep house stuff and just sort of zone out while shooting the spacemans and incrementally upgrading the spacemans. But yeah, in particular things though, I don't really know. I quite like having quiet dance music on when I'm also on voice with friends playing like Dota or whatever, because it means that when people aren't speaking, I can kind of zone out, or even when they are speaking, sometimes I can zone out. Works both ways.
I play a lot of games that are easily playable in a window, so turn-based games, for example, things that you can tab away from and leave for long periods of time. I'm playing Dominion's 4 match at the moment. We play by email. I play a lot of Football Manager. I'm looking forward to the next version of that. I play a lot of Europa Universalis and Crusader Kings and that sort of stuff. And so I've always got Spotify on, or YouTube open, or Netflix open, and that kind of thing. It's been a little while, I think, since I've had any specifically good pairings. Like, I used to do similar things, like before Counter-Strike matches and stuff like that, listen to a particular playlist in order to set an energy level or something like that within myself, and I would notice a difference in my performance. But at the moment, I'm listening to a lot of Japanese indie rock bands, just because I happen to be listening to a lot of Japanese indie rock bands at the moment. So go listen to Number Girl and play Crusader Kings 2 or Dominions 4.
I will say, actually, the thing is, the two exceptions I would say is, Taylor Swift does go with everything. Genuinely does.
Well, that one song, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can dig pretty deep. If you go back into the back catalogue down to like Speak Now, Bitchy, Teenage Taylor Swift era, there's a lot of tracks in the back half of that album that are pretty good with Counter-Strike. Thinking specifically of like Haunted or Better Than Revenge. Anyway, the other thing I'd say genuinely does go with everything is Carpenter Brute, which is I think they're French or Canadian, I don't know.
That's an extreme example of podcast voice.
Yeah. French-Canadian.
I really don't know. They could be American or English.
Spanish.
Yeah.
Or Japanese. Listen to many different countries.
Yeah, it's fine. But yeah, like sort of heavily 80s inspired synthy electronica. They are doing the soundtrack or parts of the soundtrack for Hotline Miami 2, I believe.
Oh, cool.
And so they'll probably become a lot more famous a lot more quickly. But they've got 2 albums on Spotify and they're both fucking amazing. And does genuinely go with everything.
If you're ever playing like a dark, moody game, or anything with noir kind of themes, such as Gunpoint, you shouldn't mute the music for Gunpoint because it's brilliant. But if you do mute the music for Gunpoint, the thing you should play is
Shake It Off by Taylor Swift.
That would work. But the music that John Roberts, our artist, was listening to as he did a lot of the art was, you might have to correct me on this, Graham, Die Boeren and the Club of Gore.
And their Club of Gore, yeah. Yeah.
And they are a sort of dark jazz collective, who do like jazz stuff, but really, really sinister and kind of moody and much nastier than Gunpoint's soundtrack, which has kind of like, fun spy stuff for the missions and then like chilled lounge stuff for the menus and then sad, lonely, jazz for the main theme. But yeah, this is just dark.
They released a new album this past year, which is great. As great as the stuff that we were listening to a couple of years ago. Awesome. I also recently discovered, I think it's the Kilimanjaro Dark Jazz Club.
Yes.
It's a club.
But then there was another one called the Mount Fuji Doom Jazz Collective. It's like another mountain and another dark word.
Lots of good dark jazz. Type dark jazz into YouTube, you'll find a lot of good stuff. I listen to a lot of jazz music.
And listen to that whilst playing Pickle.
Actually, if you're listening to if you're playing Deus Ex Human Revolution, reggae doesn't go with it, but there's a lot of electronic music that would do. There's
the soundtrack's really good for that game.
Yeah,
actually, just listen to
that. There's a group I like, or artists I like, called Makeup and Vanity Set, who are doing kind of almost Hotline Miami-ish style, heavy, dark disco beats, but for a game called Brigador.
Okay.
Which we talked about, which we talked about on a previous episode of the podcast, and it is a kind of cyber-punky techno thriller future game, like
you did some amazing descriptions of things, and
like well, miming a box.
Yeah, so it's like a box, and then it's a cyber-punky techno thriller game.
Which is what Deus Ex is, and so that kind of music is all on Bandcamp. Look up Makeup and Vanity Set. That will suit.
I might have said this on this podcast or a podcast before, but I can't think of the Deus Ex theme, the original one, because when I try and think of it, I always get the theme tune for the X-Men cartoon. Try and think of both of them; it's impossible.
Well, all I can hear is the X-Men theme tune
exactly.
Because whenever I try and hear the Deus Ex music, I hear the Unreal Tournament music, which I think was by the same guy.
I hear Mass Effect.
What is this?
It's the Asari of game themes.
Yeah, everyone finds it attractive.
It was great. It's also on Spotify, the Deus Ex Human Revolution soundtrack.
Huh. The X-Men cartoon's really good.
It is really good.
Okay.
Actually, that's Deus Ex. Fuck.
Only one of them's got Jubilee in it, and that's one too many. Andrew Dorsey writes, Dear Carts and Customers, I am a student at a university who's doing everything I can to distract myself from my important assignments, which I will now finish after this email. I promise. Anywho, what's your favourite guilt-ridden go-to game to distract yourself from whatever important responsibility you are avoiding? Mine personally is Goat Simulator, where I can immediately create chaos without context or filler. Sincerely listening from across the pond, Andrew Dorsey.
I'm hoping it'll become Defense Grid 2. That's kind of why I started it. Like, I had a bunch of stuff I needed to play, but I'm like, this one will actually hook me, and like, this one I will probably not be able to stop playing. And I kind of just wanted to get into something, so I've played so many things only briefly. But for now, it's that Might and Magic game, the one with the cards and the armies. I've talked about it loads here. Clash of Heroes?
Clash of Clans? Not Clash of Clans, that's it.
Clash of Mighty Magic Heroes.
It's the one by, is it Capybara?
Yeah.
I think it is Clash of Heroes, and Clash of Clans is the mobile game.
Yes.
Yeah, Might and Magic Clash of Heroes, the most generic title conceivable, but it's really
Apart from, what was it? War of Games?
Game of War Fire Age.
War Fire Age, yeah.
Which Twitter
that has
constantly
fire in it.
advertises to me.
At least when you say fire, I actually picture fire, whereas Clash of Heroes, Might and Magic Clash of Heroes, none of those words evoke anything in me. I don't picture anything. I don't picture a clash, I don't picture heroes, I don't picture might, I don't picture magic.
I think I would go... I would go for any game that I feel is also in some way work. So Dota can be work. I write a column about it every week in my life. If I slack off to play Dota, then I feel like I'm somehow contributing to the viability of the next 3-lane highway or whatever that ends up being. If I sometimes play like anything derived from a pen and paper role playing thing, because I'm getting more and more into that stuff and finding out more about it. So that feels like work in a way that makes me able to justify it as an extracurricular activity. And now, and also that kind of, kind of draw to go and achieve something in whatever MMO it is I'm playing at a time. Like, I'm going to go do my dailies or whatever. Because that's also work. Gotta incrementally improve my space guy. And he's not going to incrementally improve himself. Basically, I'm not good at taking breaks. I'm good at pretending that things aren't breaks.
I've definitely stopped playing games before because they felt too much like the work I actually do. Like Space Chem feels like programming. And that's, like, there were enjoyable parts to programming, but I can enjoy those whilst also, at the end of the day, having made significant progress on my game. Whereas if I played Space Chem, I haven't done anything, really.
The way my job is kind of structured is that I have constant deadlines, and so there is no real room for slacking within that. I have to hit certain deadlines on the hour every day. And so the responsibility that I tend to end up avoiding is playing new games. And the way that I avoid playing new games is by playing old games. In as much as that, I really should play Alien Isolation. I know what I'll do. I will play 7 games of FIFA Ultimate Team and then go to bed. That tends to be it. So I just play the game that I know and love rather than going and learning some new thing time and time again. Steve writes, Der Heck and Crowbar. I don't know, I guess it could be a trendy fish restaurant or something.
Is Crowbar spelled like the fish eggs?
R-O-E.
Excellent.
Eggs.
Then the pun is approved.
Excellent.
That spoiled it.
You're on awful form today.
That wasn't a joke on my part. I actually thought it was excellent.
I am a programmer. I was flicking through a document I keep to record ideas for games. I came upon an entry with no details, just a title. I remember writing it, but not what I thought it would be, or even whether I had given thoughts to its specifics. I also remember that it had just been listening to the creating Crowbar when I committed it to computer paper. Consider this a Creative Commons game title. Maybe you can organise a game jam or something. The title was Cluedo Narrative Dissonance.
That's great.
That is great.
I guess the killer was Sergeant Gruff McBadman Murders in the bedroom with his recently deceased wife with an energy weapon of some sort. Thanks for casting your pods into my ears, Steve. That's not a question, I just really liked that.
It would have to be about, like, solving the murders that someone commits in the course of trying to save, like, one life or something. Like, after the hero's already committed ludonarrative dissonance by, you know, causing way more damage than he ever fixes, or, you know, completely betraying his character, like Nathan Drake slaughtering hundreds of people. He'll be solving those murders.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all fucking Nathan Drake, because he's a psycho.
Yeah, you're more like the sort of human rights lawyer that has to come along and try and draft legislation to prevent Nathan Drake from fucking murdering everybody, while still remaining a wisecracking, lovable, sort of, not anti, but, you know.
It could be like, what kind of game protagonist could have caused all these deaths?
This could be a game jam.
That's good. That's almost as good as ludonarrative disco dance.
Cluedo narrative disco dance?
Zach writes...
That's just a rock opera waiting to happen.
Zach writes, Dear Deirdre, sometimes I make little mates when playing online multiplayer. I love the phrase little mates.
Yeah, that's weird.
I make little mates. They're called things like Tanghammer and Kilbo Fraggins. When my girlfriend's home, she sometimes asks me who I'm talking to over the headset. This is where the problem begins. I'm scared to say that they're guys I met online, because she might tell her girlfriends I'm a sado, or that I'm addicted to cybering with strangers. Also, she might ask what their names are, and I'll have to say Kilbo Fraggins or Tanghammer. But also I hate lying to her by saying it's one of my real-life friends. This is made doubly worse if she speaks to all my real-life friends and could easily find out that I'm lying, and she'll be more suspicious that I'm cybering away with strangers. I'm not. What should I do? Yours desperately, Zach.
I love this is a full-on advice column.
Yeah. He starts at Dear Deirdre, so...
It's also interesting that he's worried that his girlfriend's friends will think he's a sado when she tells them he's a sado. He's not worried about the fact that his girlfriend will think he's a sado. I guess he feels she already knows.
I think, the first step would be to ask Kilbro, or whatever his name is, Kilbo Fraggins and Tanghammer what their real names are. Because if you know that they're like, Steve and Paul, then you can say, I'm talking to Steve and Paul. And it'll become less weird in your own mind. Alternatively, own Kilbo Fraggins. Say it proudly to your girlfriend. Don't hold back. Don't be embarrassed on his behalf or your own behalf.
What does he sign the letter as?
Zach.
Which presumably is his name.
Yeah, I was wondering if he had a username, because if he has a ridiculous username himself, then he could use that as evidence to his girlfriend to say, look, online I might be Fraghammer 9000, but, I'm an actual real person.
Is there still stigma about making friends with people online? Like, I know...
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised. I was transported briefly back to the 90s when he said that. I was like, do people still think it's sad to talk to people online?
I know people who are in their 40s and 50s who have met in real life and had people stay in their house who they met through playing Facebook Scrabble.
And people in their 40s and 50s are cool.
It's the fact that it's Facebook Scrabble. You're bonding with people or playing Scrabble with people on Facebook to the point of inviting them into your life.
They only make enemies in Scrabble.
There's only war.
Scrabulous was great. That was the whole reason I signed up for a Facebook account.
There's somewhat similar game, Letterpress, on iOS. I've played that with strangers a fair bit. and I had a long game with a lady who in her profile picture, was holding a child who I presume is hers.
God, I hope so.
There was a very, very obvious fuck on the board that anyone could make. Like, it's a kind of word search thing, and you can make those words. And it was worth a lot, and it was a valuable thing, and I wasn't doing it because I wasn't going to be the first to do fuck. And I figured, like, it was one of those things where it's just like, we've both seen it. Neither of us are going to be the first one to use that. And then, like, turn 17, she uses it, and I realised she just hadn't seen it. She just know there was fuck there.
Maybe she did. Maybe she was just pushed to that.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. I did win.
I used to play that and deliberately go for the most egregious.
Yeah, I've done that too. It depends on the person you're playing with, definitely.
Yeah. No, it's strangers. If you can get bell end in there, it's all better.
What if there was a child in their profile pic?
The child's not playing.
I envisage the child also reading all the words they've got.
Yeah. Make cook.
Have we answered that question? Probably.
Oh, I think honesty is the best policy. Just tell your girlfriend, man.
Yeah.
Hammer's your bro.
Yeah.
Kilbo Fraggins. Also your bro. Mike Cook writes, "Hey pod folks, a little while back you were discussing the awesome idea of procedurally generating legal cases for video games, which was a really exciting bit of discussion. It's just a week and a bit to the Procedural Generation Jam 2014, where people are going to try and generate all kinds of weird things for games. So I wondered, what's something you'd love to see a game try and generate, but that no one has ever tried to do?" What Mike doesn't mention is that he's the organizer, or one of the organizers, of the Procedural Generation Jam 2014. Me, I'd like my own theme tune that plays whenever I do something heroic in an RPG. Maybe the more I sneak and backstab people, the more sinister and slow-paced it gets. Or maybe a huge brash section gets added in if I start hammering people's faces with giant clubs. Then I can download it and play it every time I leave my flat. Thanks for the pods, Mike.
The tricky part is, like, picking something that hasn't ever been procedurally generated by anyone. Like,
probably it would be a manner of doing it, or, you know, an effect you want to achieve that you haven't seen before.
The game that I want to make, that I am trying to make, that I have taught myself parts of Game Maker in a years-long effort to try to make, is a procedural, crime procedural. Where basically you are sucked into a TV series along the lines of Murder, She Wrote and Quincy and Magnum P.I. and so forth, and it generates murder mysteries that you then have to solve by interrogating suspects. And I think it was something that first occurred to me with FTL. Like, I think a lot of TV shows are serialized, and they have what writers often refer to as a story engine. And that's like, in Buffy, it's the monster of the week. And that is your impetus for a story to happen. In Star Trek, it's, well, we've gone to a new planet. And FTL actually mimics that story engine really well. Like, it gives you these little Star Trek-like moments. So if you go to a planet, you find a crazy person, you bring the crazy person on board, something happens. There's a nice kind of narrative to that. And that kind of story engine is what drives House MD and every crime show on TV from Castle and so forth. And there's an actual structure to it that can be replicated because it is structural. And if it's structural and has rules in that way, you can simulate that in a game. And I think you can procedurally generate murder mysteries, in terms of creating a bunch of suspects, creating relationships between them, creating reasons why they might kill one another that then become traits, and build a game out of that, which is what I'm trying to do. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And I haven't seen that done. Like, procedurally generated story is obviously a big thing that everyone is trying to do, but procedurally generated TV episodes, not so much.
So mine is similar in that it's an idea that I actually also desperately want to do, and I'm trying to figure out kind of the best medium for it. Parts of it I'm kind of trying to figure out how to do as a pen and paper thing, because it's trying to save me that year of learning tools that I don't know how to use. Whereas I know how to use pens. I have some theories about how to do certain kinds of procedure-generated narrative, particularly kinds of like epic narrative. The types of games often do, high fantasy narratives and sort of long form sort of heroic stories. And that is, my ideas are rooted in a theory that the that the games can learn a lot from the structures and language and meter of epic poetry, particularly ancient oral tradition narrative. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of formulaic structures and patterns within oral narrative, to the extent that I think there's probably an argument to be made for oral narrative as a kind of like pre-machine form of mechanical storytelling. Like, it is designed to be systemically readable so that the human mind can hold on to it and reproduce it accurately, which is, the machine in that question is kind of like the collective memory of humanity rather than a computer. But the processes are not incompatible in terms of how you create stock phrases and settings and, stock ways of handling situations and characters that allow you to kind of like reproduce and twist and move around elements and stuff. And the idea of that, in terms of what I'd like to do with it, or what I'd like to see done with it, is a game that, in place of a combat log, like, where you normally see like, Graham did 5 damage to Tom. Tom did 5 damage to Graham. Graham died, whatever.
That sounds like us.
Yeah. Would be a game that, alongside, would, as you played it, wrote the epic verse. Maybe not rhyming, but, the epic verse telling of the game as you're playing it. Incorporating combat moves from a combat system I'm working on separately. That are then passable by the machine into lines in a ongoing poem. And that would also incorporate your dialogue options and choices you made, about FTL style, where you go next and stuff like that. And the idea being that you'd play through something and the game would then essentially, in addition to you beating the challenge or whatever at the end, the game would additionally output your session as, 100, 200 lines of epic verse. So if you wanted to replay your session or revisit a playthrough, you wouldn't load screenshots or saves, you would actually have this procedurally generated oral narrative. That's what I'd like to do. That'd be good.
That sounds cool. My only answer to this would be something I'm going to, I think, probably attempt to do with heat signature is I'd like to generate people's motivations. So the idea is, like, you won't have one particular character you play as on heat signature, nor will you design one, I don't think. I think it'll probably give you a menu of randomly generated ones, and you pick which one you want to play as. And they'll be all across the galaxy, and they'll work with different factions, and they'll ultimately be doing the same kind of missions, but, for different people in different contexts. And I would like it if it just had like a sort of one-line motivation. Why is this person doing this? If they're doing it for money, why do they need the money? If they're working for a particular faction, why are they invested in that faction? Why do they hate the other guys? And it could be as simple as like, they killed my father! Or it could be like, if they need money, it's because they're starving to death, literally starving to death. Or it could be that, someone in their family is in trouble in some way. But I don't know what the good answers to that question are. And so I don't yet know how to generate them, because I wanted to generate stuff that, like, my hope is that because it's procedurally generated, and that, when it throws up cliched stuff, it won't feel cliched. Like, if only 1 in 100 times is actually because they literally killed my daughter. Like, if you write that as a plot, it's cliched and horrible, and it's even somewhat sexist. But if that naturally comes up as an even chance amongst all genders and relationships and stuff, you'd be like, holy fucking shit, they killed my daughter? I'm going to do something about that.
I think there's something satisfying to patterns and spotting patterns and understanding patterns. And, I mean, you've watched a lot of crime TV shows. There'll be, you see the same motivations for the murderers come up time and time and time and time and time again. And you can watch hundreds of episodes of these shows and you don't really get cross at the fact that it's formulaic or that, the same motivations kind of come up round and round again. So I think procedural stuff does buy you a lot of just in the player's head accepting of these tropes that if it had been scripted and if it was just one thing, you would be so angry at.
Yeah.
Stephen writes, greetings, gentlemen. I've recently been playing Diablo 3 after a long stint away from RPGs, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the constant shower of loot I'm getting, even though 90% ends up getting junk. At the same time, I've been hearing Destiny players complain about their loot system being slow and plodding. This leads me to an interesting question. When playing an RPG, would you rather A, get a ton of loot all the time, but it's mostly crap with a few good ones here and there, i.e. Diablo, Borderlands, World of Warcraft, or B, get a very small and slow amount of loot, but it's all good and worthy of your time, i.e. Destiny or Mass Effect? Personally, I prefer the first option as I find the loot lottery an inherently enjoyable part of the game. What's your choice? Thanks for your time, Tom.
So, I can answer this, but... and I get the impression that... Is it Tom?
Yeah, Tom.
Hasn't played Destiny, but is...
No, Stephen.
Good, Stephen. I think I'm getting this probably like a second-hand opinion of Destiny. I want to talk about fucking Destiny, because it's really relevant to a shitload of PC game design things. It's not on the PC, but that's not going to stop me. I'm going to drink this sherry. The notion that Destiny has a slow loot system is a misunderstanding of how Destiny's loot system works. And that points to a middle ground between the two things he's describing, which I think is how to do a loot system correctly. So, the way Destiny's loot system works is, everyone is kind of going for the same equipment, or the equipment of the same rough power level in order to level up. Your leveling up beyond a certain point is tied to your equipment, not your XP.
Huh.
So, you get XP up to level 20, and then after level 20 you start to find equipment that has a new stat on it that doesn't appear before then. And then your cumulative total of that stat affects your level post 20. And so what that means is your leveling up isn't tied to time spent, but items found. And so, but there are multiple systems all running at once. Like, playing Destiny well is a question of playing it efficiently, so you're doing multiple different progression paths all at once, because all of them give you different ways of getting that equipment. So what this creates is a scenario where there is a maximum amount of time you should be able to spend without getting the equipment you ultimately need. Towards the upper end, there is some kind of like you could just get unlucky, but most of the time you should be building up your reputation and getting special currency and stuff like that, which means that if you put a lot of time in, eventually you will just buy the items you need. However, at every single point and every single thing you do on that journey, you are always rolling the dice invisibly whenever you kill anything of getting some of those items early. Because the items you get when you get random loot are the same items you might then, buy from a reputation vendor later on. So, the progression either occurs because you worked hard for a certain amount of time, or you got spectacularly lucky and skipped ahead. And that means that you have a scenario where, you're always making progress towards something that is a tangible goal that you can see your progress towards. But, sometimes you'll feel really lucky because the game just skips you ahead because you're lucky now. And I think that's actually a really good balance between a loot system that doesn't overwhelm you with stuff you don't need, but constantly gives you stuff that you need in small amounts, while also always sort of dangling over you the chance of getting that one big item that will leap you forward in an enormous way or change your playstyle or something else. And that, I really like that about it, actually. Like, Diablo suffers because of its redundancy, I think. Like, it's nice. They present loot flying out of monsters really well. But most of it, most of your joy from the loot comes from the act of seeing it drop, not from any subsequent interaction you have with it. But on the other hand, the notion that you'll never see a drop forever and then one day you'll just get something huge is weak for the moments between them. The funny thing about Destiny, and it's true of a lot of loot games or games with a random element, is because there is a chance that, killing a random baby enemy will cause a incredibly rare item to spring out and leap you ahead in levels, a substantial portion of the player base convinced themselves that was the only way to level up. And so they started doing the famous loot cave stuff where people just shoot into a hole for hours to gain a thing. If you're doing that, you're not gaining any reputation, you're not gaining any of the other currency stuff, you're not doing any of the things that would eventually guarantee you those items. So it's really weird that a lot of the player base basically declared that they would rather roll dice for 20 hours than do a variety of things for 10. Because the roll dice thing has a chance to get you what you need in 10 minutes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't, but yeah.
It doesn't make sense, but the human thing is well, if I roll these dice, I'll get it in 10 minutes. And then you do that for 20 hours. This is bullshit! When you could have done the whole thing in 5 by just doing the other stuff in the game. And that creates this really weird culture around it. I have to say, hanging out in the Destiny community a lot, there are fucking huge problems with people's perception of what's going on in the game, but I think the design itself is really clever. And so it's this weird scenario where I don't know how many people it's made happy, but it's really fair.
They did, this reminds me of talk I talked about last week that Robin Walker gave about communicating to your audience, and he said that the Dota 2 reputation system, or something to do with like how
point system.
Yeah, something to do with reporting and that kind of stuff.
That one, yeah.
One of the only times that they actually came out and just told people how something worked. It was basically, like, a lot of the talk is about, like, don't communicate with the customers. Like, broadcast things about your update and stuff, but when they ask you individual questions, don't answer. And he said one exception they made was that this reputation system, or the reporting thing, people had so many misconceptions about how it worked, and they just, the beliefs about how it would work had consolidated into sort of folklore knowledge of, like, here's how it works, and this is why it's bullshit and it's terrible, that they had to just release a fact to say, no, it works in a totally different way, and here's exactly how it works, because they were basically not getting any data on how it really worked. Like, what they want to know is, like, when you're using our actual real system, is it working? And they couldn't get that data because everyone thought it worked in a totally different way, and so they were using it as if it worked in this imaginary way, so they're getting no data about how the real system works. They had to come out and just say, it works like this. Shut up, it works like this. Tell us if that is broken.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think I sometimes think having a random element in a game is like some of the best things you can do in terms of like making something engaging over time, if it's balanced well against reliable stuff. But like the random number data does make humans insane. Like casinos operate on that principle.
Yeah.
That you, literally there's some fucking bug in our internal systems that means that we can't really handle the notion that something might be amazing but might not be.
There's this great study of there's like scanner boxes. If you press the button and food comes out a certain number of times, and if you do that with pigeons, where they get fed if they push the button a certain number of times, they start to become superstitious. Like pigeons start to think, oh, if I press the button and go like this with my head and bob up and down, that's what makes the food come out. And the pigeons will start to train themselves in this bizarre behaviour because they think they are controlling the god machine with the food pellets inside it.
It's like, we're probably like probability creatures. Like probably a big part of evolution is learning what's probably going to kill you and like going like, nah. But then something that might probably give you something nice is like just fucking hard, like hot wires that system and turns people inside out.
Well, it doesn't cost you anything to bob your head up and down, and if you are powerless, then you've got nothing to lose or gain, so you might as well bob your head up and down. Keep doing it, pigeons.
Good job.
And so, Diablo.
A butthurt Camilla fan writes, Dear CNC, love your podcast. You guys get me through many a boring workday. Unfortunately, your last episode compelled me, and no doubt a bunch of other Devil May Cry fans, to write in to tell you why you're wrong about DMC Devil May Cry, which was the most recent game in the series, made by
Ninja Theory,
the guys that made Heavenly Sword, which has some awesome level design and art direction and action, but is a subpar Devil May Cry game. In the last episode, me and Tom Sr. argued that Devil May Cry fans were wrong about Devil May Cry. That they decided
always a tough sell.
Before it came out that it was going to be shit, and therefore, just because it was different in certain ways, never really embraced it, when actually it's brilliant and inventive and has a great combat system and some of the best level and art direction of any game ever. This guy disagrees. No doubt you have a billion of these emails, so I'll break it down simple. 1, no lock-on, which eliminate side-rolling and makes some combos impossible. 2, Unreal Engine is not as good as MT Framework for a character action game. 3, color-coded enemies eliminates combo potential for most weapons. And finally, most importantly, 4, game is piss easy on highest level difficulty.
If you have previously mastered every other game in the series.
Yes. Even the final mode, Hell or Hell, in which Dante dies and one hit and enemies are on their hardest AI pattern with max health, was easier than Devil May Cry 3 on its 3rd out of 5 difficulty settings. XCOM. This may be a complaint unique to fans of character action games such as Devil May Cry, Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance, Bayonetta or Wonderful 101, but I expect these games to be genuine challenges in which completing the hardest difficulty level is actually a test of skill. The fact that this game got Game of the Year above Metal Gear Rising Revengeance still boils my blood, goddamn. Signed, a butthurt Camilla fan.
Sorry, I thought his name at the start and the end, but that's not his real name.
Well, We'd hope not.
The thing is,
Nominative determinism, if it was.
If Zach earlier was talking to him online, he's going to have a hard time explaining the username to his girlfriend.
I could see both sides on this one. I wasn't privy to that prior discussion, and I really like DMC, but I mean, but like, the argument I would posit is that his complaints, a lot of them are accurate in terms of the ways that the game was simplified. They still made a really good game that wasn't perhaps hard enough. However, the previous Devil May Cry game was Devil May Cry 4, which I think is shit. It's hard and it retains a load of the systems, but it's one of the worst structured character action games I've ever played. It makes you play it forwards then backwards. You played it, Graham?
Yeah.
4 is like, and I don't know, like there was clearly, for whatever personnel reason, Kamiya going off to do other things, whatever, like a reason why that property needed lifting up and shaking and putting back down in a different form.
Yeah.
And sequels do not have a responsibility to take every single thing from the game that preceded them, and to even meet every single need. There is a degree to which it's a shame that they made a DMC in the West that didn't please the people who had followed it for a long time. But I really didn't want to see a direct sequel to Devil May Cry 4 after the shit show of the second half of that game.
It's the thing of, like, I can understand what he's saying, that DMC Devil May Cry was a good game, but not a good Devil May Cry game. But that limitation forces all sequels to just tread water forever, essentially. They can never really grow because they always have to repeat the successes of their past. And I think that's the thing. I think the really hardcore fans dismissing the enjoyment of people who liked that game, or especially dismissing the people who like that game as somehow not really into it, or, I think they dismissed their own enjoyment of that game to some extent, of like, oh, this is a good game, but it's not a good Devil May Cry game. Well, yeah, but it's a good game.
Kamiya went off and made something else. Like, at that point, you've got to say, well, actually, I'm a Kamiya fan, and I'm going to go play Bayonetta,
Which is fucking brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's like, see Bayonetta as the real sequel to Devil May Cry 4, which is also, like Devil May Cry 3, I guess, which was also like a fucking amazing direction for that series to take, and to see it as branching. Like, I know probably big parts of internet fandom will disagree with me on this, but no one really gives a shit about Dante, do they? Yes is the answer.
Yeah, someone always cares.
Yeah.
It's quite, I like...
Someone always cares about hair.
Yeah.
Someone always has.
Yeah. Well, Shinmeyer writes, Dear Crates and Crowbars.
Good one. Sorry, that came off harsher than I meant.
Sarcastic pun fan, John Francis.
This is not a question, but a response to a conversation we had last episode, but this time about Psychonauts, where I think
talking about
you and Thomas lamented some parts of that game's level design. He says, Rejoice! For after Double Fine got the rights to Psychonauts back a couple of years ago, they updated the Steam version, making the infamous Meat Circus easier.
Oh, really?
If that's where you got stuck, maybe give it another shot.
Might have been, actually.
One of my favourite games as well. I'm especially fond of Black Velvetopia. The game is a nice example of how a good art style is superior to visual fidelity. It still holds up well.
I probably don't have my saves, though, so I'd have to replay the entire game up to that point.
I wonder if you can download the save somewhere.
Yeah, probably.
Websites, but
probably cheap to it.
It's interesting that I didn't know that they got the rights back a couple of years ago, or any of that stuff, that they patched it. It's good that they did.
Yeah, because Notch was offering to, sort of vaguely talking about funding the second one, and then Tim said, but it will cost actual billions. Like, not sort of little millions, but real millions. And then he was not so keen on it.
He can afford that. No?
Yeah, that's come up a lot since he earned $2 billion. Or what was it, 1.7 for himself. Only 1.7.
Only 1.7.
But still, for Psychonauts, even if they went over budget by the same percentage that they went over budget with Double Fine Adventure, which is, I believe, 1,000%, they could still make it for whatever their quote was to Notch then.
Yeah. Scoo on Twitter writes, will any of the CNC team be heading back to World of Warcraft to try the new expansion, or have you girded your loins to such temptations?
Spaceman's to incrementally upgrade it.
This question shocked me because I sort of forgot World of Warcraft still existed, and like the fact that there's an expansion coming, I just remembered. Oh yeah, I did see something about that like once.
Warlords of Draenor.
Yeah,
they've just done the pre-expansion patch last week.
I won't, but I'm almost tempted because I do. Every now and then I like dipping into World of Warcraft and just seeing what's up and just seeing how it's improved and stuff. And like Cataclysm was a big deal, and it was cool to go around and see places I remember totally changed.
I also want to just answer this because I think I found out recently what gird your loins means. And I believe that Scoo has very slightly misused the phrase. He's used it in the context of us repressing our desire for WoW, which suggests that what gird your loins means is don't get an erection. But that's actually not the case. To gird your loins is from the time when men wore long tunics in the Middle East or in North Africa. If you're wearing a long tunic, it's not the most practical thing to fight in. Mm-hmm. So if you're about to fight somebody, you would sort of like make a crotch turban out of the hem of your robe by pulling
crotch turban your robe
by pulling it back through your legs, wrapping it back around your waist, and then tying it in a knot. So you basically create shorts.
So your legs would be bare at that point?
Yeah, so you were kind of inventing shorts, because you were pulling them, so you have to imagine the middle of your robe going through your legs, and then all the excess material coming around the front, and then being tied in a knot.
Massively sort of like, basically sumo wrestler pants, but then also like your whole robe is also bunched up, and then your legs are just totally bare and skinny.
Like a giant,
come at me, bro!
Like a giant man nappy. That is the act of girding your loins.
I'm never going to gird my loins again.
That is what girding your loins is. It is creating a formidable man nappy to allow you to more readily fight people in the desert. And so in the face of the new World of Warcraft expansion, I will not be. My loins will be free and ventilated.
Particularly since you can run around that game in a robe just fine.
Yeah, indeed. But, sorry, wizards in games should have the option of girding.
Special ability, takes 2 seconds to cast.
Yeah.
What's the cooldown?
Well, I mean, imagine you just tug at the end of the robe and it all comes free. But, maybe like,
it's a stance.
If assailants approach within melee range of the wizard, combat girding. Increases dexterity, takes 2 seconds to cast. There you go. I don't know why I said that.
But it's said now.
And that's all the time for questions we've got. If you'd like to send some questions of your own, you can do so
by emailing us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can also leave a question on our forum, which is at crateandcrowbar.com/forum, or you can tweet us at crateandcrowbar. You can also tweet us individually. I'm at cthurston, CTHURSTEN. Tom is
at Pentadact, PNTADACT.
And Graham is
at Gonnas, GONNAS. And if Marsh and Tom S were here, they would say that they are continuing their Dark Souls 2 playthrough on YouTube. And you should go watch that.
Yeah, I think
tragically they're not, so you shouldn't.
Yeah. Indeed, what a bunch of dickheads.
Wankers.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody.